What's the most elaborate scam you fell for? I put a room up for rent once. Someone applied and said they would be moving in at the first of the month. They said they were military and switching bases. This person said they were going to go ahead and ship their car out and fly in. The car arrived and was offloaded by truck. A few days later the car was gone. The person never arrived. A month or so later the police knocked and asked about the car. Ended up being that the car was stolen by whoever this person was that shipped it, and the person who picked it up was a buyer who thought it was legit. Apparently he had a set of keys mailed to him and a fake title. I'd if it ever got sorted, but they initially assumed that I was a part of it. At the start of college one year, when everyone was moving into houses in the usual shitty but affordable part of a college town, a guy walked up to us and said he can get us free HBO. He'd just take $20. He knew a guy. We're like, cool. He takes out his cell phone, walks a few steps away out of earshot, says check our TV. We go, and lo and behold, HBO. We give him $20 and he walks away. A week later, it was gone. The dude just called HBO for some free trial week. He must have hit up every college kid moving in that day and made bank. I had free HBO for a couple of years. Apparently at the time it was broadcast on the coax cable, but there was a physical filter that blocked the signals from people who weren't paying for it. And yeah, it was up on the telephone pole. You couldn't get to it yourself. We were having all these problems with internet connectivity, and the service tech was really nice and getting equally fed up with the corporate bureaucracy giving us the runaround. They kept trying to say our network was bad, and the technician kept checking and saying that the problem was on the back end. At one point we are hanging out for an hour waiting for them to reset something on the back end and chatting about video games and stuff. The tech had to climb the pole for like a fifth time, and it was finally working. He's like, so yeah, there's a physical filter that blocks HBO. It probably wasn't causing your internet problems, but you never know. So I took it off to be on the safe side, and I couldn't find a replacement in my truck with a wink and a nudge. Then he continued, if someone else comes out and catches it, they might put one back on. But until then, enjoy free HBO. It ended up being like 3 years. Visa gift cards are also an elaborate scam on their own. It's almost impossible to use it all because you have to know exactly how much is left on it. And if you forget about them for a few months too long, everything's gone in inactivity fees or whatever else they call their way of putting an expiration date on your money, and they have the balls to call it the perfect gift. Oh boy, I still cringe about that. Back in the late 90s, early zeros, when chat rooms were popular, I met this guy there and we ended up chatting pretty much daily. He had an unusual name for the region. That should have been the first clue. We chatted and sent letters to each other, by actual post. Tried to meet up with him so many times, but he always had something come up. One night on New Year's Eve, when we were supposed to meet finally, his cousin shows up and said yeah, he'll come soon. He told me to wait here with you, pretended to call him several times to ask where he was. An hour or so later I just went back home and never talked to the guy again. Turned out the cousin was the guy I was chatting with, and he had made a deal with another guy to see how long I would believe all this. I can't believe I fell for it. Keep in mind I was 16-something back then. My old roommate talked online with a woman he was in love with for months. Was told to meet her at the airport 3 different times. Each time she wasn't there, he would show me pictures she sent, and each time it was a different woman with very similar features. I pointed it out to him and got grief back for being an asshole. I can't believe I fell for the scam on Diablo 2 LOD, where you go to a spot in the town of Act 2 and turn on PvP, and then you pick up your corpse with a loaded inventory and it drops all your actual items. It seems like the other person can't kill you because you are in town, but there is one small spot. It was a complicated set of weird instructions that I followed for some reason. I don't know what the fuck I was thinking that day. I can't even believe I was ever that stupid at some point in my life. I don't know if it's necessarily the most elaborate scam of all time, but there are a range of fake sites online that offer us a visa for entry into the US. The funny thing about the sites is that they actually process your visa, but they just do it by sending your details to the official site and charging you $100 or so of idiot tax. I got caught a few years back and I wasn't even really mad. It was such an amazingly set up grift. And what made it even better was that you really had no recourse because they were actually giving you what you paid for. In the late 50s or early 60s, some guy came into my grandpa's shop selling colored TVs out of the back of a truck. The family had never had a color TV, and the price was way less than what the store charged. So he bought one. He excitedly brought it home, plugged it in and turned it on, black and white. He played with the knobs and antenna. Nothing, no color. The guy took a bunch of old black and white TVs, slapped a rainbow sticker on them, and sold them as color. Brilliant. This will probably get buried, but it's one of the best scams, felonies, I've ever heard. Someone in my super small town got their grill stolen off their front porch one day. Obviously they were like, what in the hell? And they're bummed. A couple of days later, the grill shows back up on their front porch with an attached note that reads something along the lines of, "Our son has a problem with stealing things which do not belong to him. We found this on our property and got it out of him who he took it from and made sure he brought it back to you. Please don't call the police to report this and enjoy 4 tickets to the Cleveland Indians game on us. So sorry for the inconvenience." Needless to say, the people who lived there were relieved to have their grill back and went to the game that Saturday to enjoy the tickets some nice parents, presumably, had left for them to make up for their shitty son's actions. Except our town was about 2 hours from Cleveland, between the drive there and back and the baseball game. I'd say the family was gone for about 10+ hours that day. Guaranteed. When they returned home, their house had been burgled. Everything, electronics, cash, jewelry, anything you could think of as potentially valuable was gone. Someone concocted a hell of an elaborate ruse they knew would get those people out of their house for a good half a day in order to rob the ever-loving shit out of them, all for the cost of a couple of Indians tickets. It's a funny story to tell, but no doubt was incredibly scary and invasive at the time to that poor family. I had a cousin who used her miscarriage to get money from me. She made this whole sob story about how it damaged her insides and she needed help to fix it, but she didn't have insurance. She knew a doctor who'd help her for a fee. A part of why I fell for it was because no one told me she had scammed a lot of people too. Though a few years later she fell for a quick get-rich-quick scam that took all her savings and got her in trouble with the law. Went into PC world. Curious to buy a PC about 8 years ago. Was offered a rent contract paying monthly, which I looked over and it said I could keep the computer after 2 years or just upgrade to a brand new one. The total price was only a couple of £100 more than buying it outright. Anyway, I decided not to have this rent contract and told them I wanted to buy it to keep but pay monthly. They drew up a new contract and I checked it. It said to own paying monthly and not to rent like the previous contract. I signed it and they went to photocopy it, so we both had a copy. Looked at the front of the paperwork and it said to own. Happy. I went home. 2 years later I get a harsh letter saying I failed to return the computer and needed to phone them ASAP or I would be taken to court. I dug out my paperwork and saw it said to own, so after back and forth I looked deeper into the small print to see if I had missed something. It was the correct front page, but when they went to photocopy it they must have switched the paperwork. The part where I signed looked exactly the same on both contracts, so my signature said I had only rented the computer. The terms and conditions I had signed wasn't to keep it but instead only rent. I remember double and triple checking the paperwork before signing, so I believe they switched it when they went to photocopy it. After a while I got a letter saying they would be getting someone to come and collect the PC and a fine for stealing it. Long story short, we didn't go to court. My lawyer, said that as shady as it appears going to court, all they are going to do is waste my time, so we came to an agreement that I pay the fine they want. In the end about another £400, and also I have to rent another product and they will let me keep the computer. I agree and rented the cheapest shitty iPad for a year and got in writing the computer was now owned by me. A year later they told me to return the computer and iPad, so I sent them a strongly worded letter with a copy of them saying I now own the computer. I dropped off the iPad and didn't hear from them again. I also spoke to a lot of other people online around the same time that had similar things happen. My first, and last, experience with PC World. I work in IT, so a few years back I went there with my now ex-mill to pick out a laptop for my then Phil. Nothing special, just a basic machine for web browsing, YouTube and checking emails. Pick one out that's a decent make and not too overpriced. So we call the salesman over and say we want this one. He says I'll do a special rate on Windows Office 365 and McAfee antivirus subscription as well. Me? No thanks, I have freeware alternatives for those. Him, oh, well you'll invalidate the warranty if you put illegally downloaded software on there. Me? No I won't, plus it's open source software. There's nothing illegal about it. Him, legally I'm not allowed to sell you the laptop without an antivirus package on it. Me? That's complete and utter bollocks. Just give us the fucking laptop and stop wasting our time. Don't even think about trying to add anything else on. I get that they're probably put under pressure by management to upsell these add-on packages, but come on, don't bullshit a bullshitter. A phone call just as I graduated high school. I nearly fell for it. I was maybe 17-18 years old still looking for a job. The call goes as this. Hi, my name is John Doe, and I am with the FBI. We have a warrant out for your arrest. I'm terrified because it sounded real, so I kept listening. It seems you owe $259.27 in taxes. You may call the IRS, or you may mail it to somewhere to sort the issue. My heart was racing because though I was wanted for tax evasion before my first job. I asked my dad what I should do and he told me to call the local sheriff's department, so I did. I was relieved to hear that I didn't have a warrant and that it was a scam. My grandmother gave away my grandparents' life savings to a Nigerian scammer. She fell for one of those emails from someone stating my grandfather's long-lost uncle died and left them $2 million and 2 Mercedes and they needed $5,000 to process the transaction. This went on for close to 2 years. The money was taken slowly. Each time they called, it was a different excuse. The car was stuck in California in customs and they needed money to get it out. The car was halfway there but ran out of gas, or blow a tire. It was one thing after another. My dad and the rest of the family begged her to stop sending money, but she truly believed in her heart the money and cars were on their way. Sad really. My dad contacted every government agency there was to try to stop it, but they all said they couldn't help because she was willingly still giving them money. Eventually, I think she came back to reality. My grandfather got on the phone and told them he thought they were a scammer and they threatened his life, said they knew where he lived and such. So, they were paranoid for a while that these guys were going to come after them. It's been about 5 years since all that happened and my grandfather has passed away. Now my grandmother doesn't have enough social security to live on and my dad has to send her money to get by because she gave all hers away. I used to work in a bank. We had a 90-year-old man who started coming and taking out cash, $2K, $3K at a time. Then he started sending wire transfers out of the country. I sat him down to talk to him, and he explained that he was a businessman, and that he knows all about these email scams. This was different. He was helping a barrister in Benin retrieve $7 million, and was going to use it to help children worldwide. This was when I found out he was calling various youth organizations around our area and was pledging large donations. He absolutely refused to believe it was a scam. He told me that he had switched from cash to wires because Western Union had banned him. I spoke to security and made the decision to stop sending his wires. He would come in, fill out the request with me, and I would shred it. I emailed the scammers and told them I knew what they were doing and they'd never see another dime from him. They told him to try a big bank like Chase or the Citibank, knowing they wouldn't pay as close attention. I tried to speak to his son, but he didn't seem to understand. Unfortunately, He ended up passing away shortly after this. His daughter called me a few weeks later to thank me, as she was going through his records and emails, and said that we probably saved him tens of thousands. These people are truly the scum of the earth. This has happened to so many people I know. They all act as if they're not being scammed and deem me jealous of their upcoming fortune. They even had the gall to teach how to spot scams and stop them. One person sold all her property and now lives in the basement of her daughter's house. No savings and no money. Another believed he'd be a millionaire and blew all his income on expensive crap, and he almost killed himself when he realized he wasn't getting any money. There's a special place in hell for these folks. My grandfather sent $5,000 to someone who convinced him he was me and that I was stuck in a prison in Mexico. I am 3 states away from him, so I find out through my parents, call my grandfather, and in that moment of hearing his confusion was when we realized he was suffering from dementia for the first time, so I cried for the first time in my adult life when I got off that call. The only scam I've completely fallen for was a short change artist when I was 18. Ended up giving him $20. I've half fallen for, well, if not a scam, then a really shitty marketing scheme. I bought my house and moved in. 2 weeks later in the mail comes a water sampling kit and a flyer that very much looks like it was from a company contracted by the county to do spot tests of water quality across the system. It wasn't. It was a company that wanted to sell me a whole house water filter. I told them to fuck off and still occasionally get the sampling kits. I've wondered if they actually test the water or not. I'm guessing not even with pennies to buy test strips, and have considered putting mineral oil in one of the sample tubes and sending it back to see if they comment on my water quality when they call to try and schedule an appointment. I've seen things like this at Home Depot. You send back the free test kit, the company calls you with water quality results and then tries to schedule a day to sample your water at your home. They disassemble your faucet to install a water filter, which you can't easily remove. Luckily I caught on to this scam when they called with results and they couldn't provide units for their sample values. We had a similar company come out and waste an evening of our time. We got the water kit for free at Home Depot, so figured it was legit. He did all sorts of tests on our tap water trying to scare us, then tested our spring water dispenser and said there were high levels of dissolved solids in it and it wasn't safe. Yeah, our town water is really hard, so we will probably do a DIY softening system at some point for a fraction of the cost. I'm not even sure what this scam was or what they were trying to accomplish, but I clearly fell for something. I get a call on my cell from some guy who states he's working for a human resources company. He tells me my father, who lives halfway across the country, had signed on to volunteer with an organization which I know is local to their community and had put me as a peer reference. My father hadn't told me he was doing that, but it was not out of character for him, so I assume legit. Guy on phone tells me his business had been contracted to do background checks for that organization and follow up on references. Guy sounds like a native English speaker. Even sound like we might be from the area my parents live. He states my father's name and address, asked to confirm I'm his child. I agree, and it doesn't set off alarms since he told me. Didn't ask. He asks some generic questions about my dad that you'd get on a peer reference, basically rating him on friendliness, honesty, communication, hard work, etc. Again, I'm not really giving any vital information, so my alarms aren't going off. Then he starts transitioning to health information. Asks if my dad can reliably lift 20 pounds and carry it some distance. This seems a bit odd, but potentially he'd have to do some light manual labor at volunteering, so I agree he could handle that. Then they start asking quite specific questions about health conditions he's had, including past injuries and surgeries, asking me if they're accurate and would affect his ability to volunteer. This where I get kinda weirded out, because it felt off that a peer reference call would bring up personal health information at all. I basically try to wave it off and say I don't know about all that stuff, really, although I do, and try to brush past it. Soon the guy is done, thanks me for my time, and ends call. The whole thing feels weird and I talk it over with my wife and she agrees. Call my parents and, of course, my dad hasn't volunteered with anything nor put me as a peer reference. I couldn't figure out what kind of scam this was. I guess I confirmed some demographic information they could use for identity theft, but they seemed already to know it, and it was information that was probably discoverable online. The health stuff was really odd. It seemed like a private investigator looking into a disability or unemployment claim, but my dad was retired and had no such claims outstanding.